Well, this is more than a serendipity. It's a God moment for me. In 2010, I happened to see an inspiring telecast, CNN Heroes, an all-star tribute to 10 individuals who are making a difference in our needy world. Each hero was introduced by a Hollywood celebrity. Gerard Butler was first up in the program and proud to introduce a fellow Scotsman who today is his good friend. Magnus MacFarlane Barrow writes about that night to remember in his book, The Shed That Fed a Million Children, the extraordinary story of Mary's Meals. The founder and chief executive is here from, I was going to say Argyll, Scotland, but to be exact, it would be Dalmally?
Dalmally, that's quite right.
In the Highlands?
Yeah, in Argyll, it's kind of the Highlands.
Oh,
yeah.
You've taken me away already. And it is just so good to meet you in person, Magnus.
Lovely to meet you too.
And this book was absolutely amazing. My husband read it immediately after me. I had to pry my copy away from my daughter. She's not done yet. And the neat thing is that this story really begins in 1992 with a Bosnia connection. Tell us about that.
That's right. Winter 92, dark, rainy night in Dalmally. My brother and I had just watched a bulletin on the news about how people were suffering in Bosnia at that time during the war there. And we just said, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could do one small thing to help the people there? And we launched a little appeal asking people for food and clothing. We drove that there. I was a salmon farmer, expected to go back to my job. A week later, found out God had a completely different plan, because by the time I got home, there was this mountain of food and clothing and still pouring in from people, all these donations. So,
was it 22 truckloads that you took?
That one year, I ended up driving 22 times to Bosnia. Absolutely. So really just prompted by that outpouring of kindness. And in many ways, that's been the story of this work ever since.
And let's not minimize the shed. I couldn't wait for the actual copy of the book. And really the best picture of the shed is online, not even in the book. The shed is nothing more than a shed. It's the headquarters, the global headquarters of Mary's Meals today.
That's right. It was my father's shed, and back in '92 when we did that little appeal, I said, Dad, could I borrow your shed maybe for a week, maybe two? Here we are over 20 years later. He's never had it back. He's very happy about that. And so it's my office, and it's become the global HQ of Mary's Meals.
What God has done here is a story everyone needs to read. Your parents had a hunting, fishing lodge, Craig Lodge. The working of God saw that transform into a prayer center, a retreat center. And in the midst of this, we find you having a kind of purposeless pint in the pub, and God does something amazing. And I think this is where Edward comes in.
Yes. So Edward I met 10 years after that first little effort for Bosnia. And that year was a year of terrible famine in Malawi. We were working there for the first time. And I was in one of the villages there. And I met this family. And the father of the family had died already. And the mother, who was called Emma, was dying when I met them. And she had her 6 children with her. And I began talking to her oldest child, and he was Edward. He was about 14 years of age. And at one point in the conversation, I said to him, Edward, what are your hopes? What are your ambitions in life? And he looked at me and said, I would like to have enough food to eat, and I would like to be able to go to school one day. And that was the extent of his ambition at 14 years of age. And that was something that we'd experienced over and over in the world's poorest communities, meeting children who were missing school because they were hungry, because they were working, begging, doing whatever it takes to put the next meal on the table, and therefore missing out on school. And that education, that is the key to lifting the world's poorest communities out of poverty. So Mary's Meals was born in response to that. And for me, it's not an insignificant thing that this work was launched by the words of a child. It wasn't a bunch of development experts sitting in a room somewhere or any of us having a grand plan. It was launched by those words of a child.
And the profound impact comes from something so simple. Explain it to us, Magnus.
Yeah, the concept is to provide one good meal every day in the place of education, so that we meet the immediate need of the hungry child like Edward, but at the same time we serve that meal always in the place of education, so that it enables children to come to school and get that education that can set them free. All the work is always done by the local community. This work is always owned by the local community more than it's owned by us from outside. So they volunteer their time to cook and serve the meals every day. And that's one of the most beautiful parts for me of this work. To give you an idea, today in Malawi, there are over 65,000 Malawian volunteers who take part in this mission. And it's, I always think of Mary's Meals as just like a series of lots and lots of little acts of love. None of us doing anything spectacular, but when you put all those acts of love together, it is creating something very beautiful.
You've drawn the support of royalty and former mobsters. Well, one at least. And including a Hollywood celebrity. I understand Gerard Butler took his mother, who had said, "That's the man I want you to meet, Magnus." They've been to visit. He's been a wonderful supporter. Just the way God has rallied people. But maybe the most touching thing is the joy of mothers in these needy countries who are able to feed their children. Many of the volunteers are the moms who get up early and go. They have to generate income some other way, but they're just so thankful to be able to prepare this food for their children.
Yes, and that's key to why this works, and it's key to our approach as well, that we never want to take away responsibility from people, from communities. We always want to treat people with dignity. So this is a real partnership between those communities and us, and what those people can contribute is their time and their love for those children. So as I say, it's a whole lot of us walking together with this simple goal that the hungry child is fed every day, and we all have different ways to take part in that mission.
Two things we take for granted. Education. Imagine that being the dream of your life, education. But such a powerful change agent in all of these countries, 12 countries now that you operate in, and over 1 million. I looked. If you watch the internet, it seems like the number is changing almost as you watch.
Yes.
What is the current statistic?
Well, I think to be exact, today it's 1,035,627 children will eat Mary's Meals today. And you're right, thank God that number keeps growing. But the education part of it is key. You know, one of the wonderful things for me today is to be able to go back to some of those communities and meet young people who've left school, who are in university or paid employment, who tell me, you know, I never would have been to school without those meals. I might not have been alive without those meals. Recently in Malawi, I spent some time with Veronica, who's a young lady in first year in university. Turns out she was amongst the first group of orphans that we ever fed back in 2002, and to hear her enthusiasm and confidence about her, you know, her life ahead of her and the future of Malawi, it can't help but leave you with a great feeling of hope, because it's people like her, it's that young generation that are going to lift their nations out of poverty. Not us. We can help them. We can walk alongside them, but it's them ultimately that's going to do this.
And some of those volunteers have actually benefited from the program. How sweet is that? I was so thrilled that Child 31, I counted 6 awards for this documentary. Anyone can see it online. And I really encourage you to go online and look for Child 31. You'll see the shed in there. That's not the most important thing, of course. But a lot of things I just really wanted to see are part of this dramatic, moving story of Mary's Meals. And so many good things have happened. You've met the Pope. You've had, was it lunch with the Queen at Buckingham Palace? I mean, this man tucked away salmon fishing in the Highlands. There's a message for all of us in this, isn't there, Magnus?
And some of those meeting people like that's been, they've been treats. They've been great blessings. But that's not what this work's about, and it's not. I never got involved in this work to be personally successful, and some of those personal accolades or awards do make me feel uncomfortable, because if Mary's Meals is anything, it's this grassroots movement. It's a whole lot of us doing our bit, you know. So they can be great too in terms of raising awareness of another opportunity to tell the story. So I'm not complaining about them, but they need to be taken with a big pinch of salt as well.
Father of 7, great story about your wife, Julie, who was the best truck driver when you were doing Bosnia.
That's for sure.
You weren't yet married, but you caught the vision there. You say, I learned a lot from the poorest of the poor, especially in matters of faith.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. Just one example of that. It's not in the book, actually. I remember being in Colombia a few years ago on the streets there, working with a priest who would look for children living in the streets and give them a hot breakfast and bring them back to his day centre. And we met this little boy. He was about 6 years old. He was asleep under some cardboard, and we woke him up and we gave him his breakfast. And there was a journalist with me writing a story, and she asked the little boy, "Who's your best friend?" She was trying to build a picture of his life. And he looked up at us and said, "God is my best friend." And we were all really surprised, because we knew he didn't have parents that taught him that. He didn't go to school and learn that. And the journalist said to him, "Why do you say that?" And he said, "Because God gives me everything I need." That little boy didn't know where his next meal was coming from. He'd seen his friends murdered on the streets, literally. And he said that with total conviction, and he certainly evangelized me that day, and that's an experience I've had very often with people who materially have nothing, but who are rich in their faith and their trust in the Lord.
Magnus, one of the wonderful quotes in your book. It is love that asks, that seeks, that knocks, that finds, and that is faithful to what it finds. St. Augustine's words, I think, frame the story of your life. You have been faithful to what you found, and over 1 million children today are benefiting. Communities, countries, feeling the impact. Thank you. Thank you for what you've done. Thank you for writing about it. I want to encourage you at home. This is at our e-store, the shed that fed 1 million children. Truly, it is an extraordinary story of Mary's Meals. And do pray for Mary's Meals, for Magnus McFarland Barrow and his amazing team all over the world. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me on. I enjoyed that. Thank you.